You're watching BBC World.
Another arrest over the deaths of Chinese immigrants. European Union leaders clinch a deal on savings tax despite Austria's attempts to block it. And Belgium says Britain didn't do enough to stop the hooligans travelling to Euro 2000. This is BBC News. Hello, I'm Gavin Esler. We're broadcasting from our Westminster studios because of power problems in and around BBC Television Centre in West London.
World Business Report in 30 minutes on BBC World. World Business Report in 30 minutes on BBC World.
EU leaders seek common ground in a draft statement on Iraq. They're reported to agree that force should be used only as a last resort. The Iraqis say U-2 spy planes have started overflying their territory. And at least 21 people dead after a stampede at a nightclub in Chicago. Hello, this is BBC World News. I'm Adrian Finnegan. Reports from Brussels indicate that European Union leaders who are meeting for a crisis summit on Iraq may be getting closer to a joint statement. The emergency meeting has been called to bridge the deep divisions between member states. It's understood the resolution warns Iraq that it faced a last chance to disarm peacefully. It also says force should only be used as a last resort, but UN weapons inspections couldn't continue indefinitely. Earlier, the divisions within the Union appeared to be deepening after the French president declared it would block any early moves towards military action.
This summit was called to heal divisions, but before talks even started, there were signs of ongoing tension. Jacques Chirac threatened to use the French veto at the United Nations.
We consider that war is always the worst solution. That is our position, which leads us to conclude that it is not necessary today to have a second resolution, which France could only oppose.
That's frustrating for Tony Blair, who has always insisted a second resolution on Iraq is the way forward. He thinks inspectors are only making progress because there is the threat of military force.
I think the most important thing at the moment is to send a signal of strength, not weakness, because that is the language Saddam will understand, and that is also our best chance of avoiding conflict.
So after a weekend of street protests, Europe is still divided about whether time is up for Saddam Hussein, and many governments remain in opposing camps. Britain, Spain and Italy are backing America's impatient stance. France, Germany and Greece want to slow down and give the inspectors more time. The unprecedented scale of Saturday's protest hasn't changed the position of the Hawks, but it does seem to have emboldened some countries critical of war. The special guest at the summit, Kofi Annan, warned of the dangers of a European rift.
I think we all agree that Iraq must disarm and do it proactively and immediately. And I think it is important that we focus on that principal task and avoid the tendency of turning on each other.
The one thing everybody does look likely to agree on, a statement that weapons inspectors cannot continue forever without full cooperation and that force should only be the last resort. But the big divisions at the moment are about how much time Iraq has before military action is necessary. And crucially, there's no agreement on that. Mike Sargent, BBC News.
The Iraqi Foreign Ministry says a U-2 spy plane has flown over their territory as part of the UN disarmament inspections. The overflight reportedly happened in the early afternoon. Iraq has just another 2 weeks to show a change of attitude and comply fully with UN Resolution 1441.
After the weekend's demonstrations, the Iraqi authorities organized their own anti-war protests right on the doorstep of the UN inspectors. But the UN teams are persisting with their operations. Yesterday, they visited the Al-Taji complex, where the remains of Al-Samud missiles were left lying abandoned. Last week, the UN found that a version of this rocket exceeded its permitted range. It's the kind of discrepancy that in the future, the United States will pounce on and use as a reason to abandon the inspections process. But the Iraqi leadership knows it has a few more cards up its sleeve with which it will try to convince the world that the weapons inspections are working. In the next week, they will allow the UN to begin surveillance flights with U-2 spy planes. They'll be followed by aircraft donated by Russia and France. All of this would add momentum to those who want more time for the inspectors. The Iraqi authorities know full well that the recent reports by the UN weapons inspectors gave them some additional breathing space. It didn't let them off the hook, because Britain and the United States are still continuing to apply military pressure. Despite the demonstrations and orchestrated shows of defiance, Iraq knows that the threat of war has not been lifted. Much now depends on what concessions this country makes in the coming few weeks. Raghi Omar, BBC News, Baghdad.
The UN Secretary-General Kofi Annan is reported to be preparing a revised plan in a last-ditch attempt to reunite the partitioned island of Cyprus. The newly elected president of the Greek Cypriot side, Tassos Papadopoulos, has held a meeting with the UN envoy on the island. Mr. Papadopoulos said he's ready to start talks, but wants changes to the current UN's reunification plan. There are now only 12 days until the EU deadline for an agreement runs out. If no deal is reached, only the Greek Cypriot part of the island will join the Union.
A euphoric victory rally for Cyprus's new president, Tassos Papadopoulos, elected with the support of the island's powerful Communist Party. Many of his followers living abroad were flown back to Cyprus at the party's expense to cast their vote. But Tassos, as his supporters call him, also gained votes from Greek Cypriots who feared that UN plans to reunite the island didn't respect their rights. They claimed that too many concessions had already been made to the Turkish Cypriot community. Supporters of the octogenarian President Glavkos Clerides argued that he alone could deliver a solution to the Cyprus problem, but voters remained unconvinced. The end of his 40-year political career came when he conceded victory in a phone call to his rival. So the political map of Cyprus is now redrawn, but the future is far from certain.
The new president will not have time on his side. He has to appoint a new team of negotiators and focus on what could be the last chance to solve the Cyprus problem for a generation or more. And all this in the space of just 12 days. Tabitha Morgan, BBC News, Cyprus.
Well, Lord Hannay is Britain's special representative for Cyprus. He's also a former British ambassador to the United Nations and the European Union and joins us now. Lord Hannay, thanks for joining us. Rauf Denktash, the Turkish Cypriot leader, expressed disappointment at the election result. Do you share his pessimism?
No, I've a rule that I don't express views about other people's elections, and I think he would have done well to do the same, frankly.
Okay, so they've got 12 days in which to come to some sort of agreement. Do you feel optimistic or pessimistic about that? Can they do it?
I think it can be done, yes. These negotiations, of course, have been going on for more than 3 years now. They've been through very intensive periods. There have been interruptions when the Turkish Cypriots left the table, but they came back again at the beginning of 2002, and they've been going at it 2 or 3 times a week ever since January 2002, over a year ago. I think the ground has thus been very, very well prepared. But of course there are still gaps, and that's why Kofi Annan is going to come to the island. He's going first to Ankara and Athens, and then to the island next week. And probably at some stage in this process, he is going to revise his earlier proposals. Not fundamentally, but he is going to make changes which will no doubt reflect some of the points that have been being made to him by both sides.
Mr. Papadopoulos in particular says that he wants changes to the plan. I mean, is it possible to tweak it at this late stage without sparking further counter-demands from the Turkish side?
I'm sure that there can be changes, but at this very late stage, if you want to change, the other side are likely to want to change too, not necessarily on the same issues. Alvaro de Soto and Kofi Annan are very skilled negotiators. They've handled many negotiations. They know the techniques. They know where the flexibility is and where it isn't. There is a possibility for change, otherwise the UN wouldn't be even contemplating revising its proposals. But I think to suggest that you can tear the whole plan up and start from scratch, that would be complete nonsense. But nobody is asking for that. I notice that President-elect Papadopoulos is not saying that. He's saying he will negotiate within the framework of the UN proposals.
I know you said you didn't want to comment on someone's election, but Mr. Papadopoulos worked hard during the election campaign to fight off the view that he's a hardliner, that he's distrusted and disliked by the Turkish side. I mean, is that actually how he's viewed by the Turkish side? And will it be possible for him to build the kind of relationship with Rauf Denktash that his predecessor had?
Well, I think the view of him from the north, as you've heard from Mr. Denktash, is not a positive one. Whether that is justified or not, I wouldn't really like to comment on. The fact is that the main party that supported the Papadopoulos campaign, apart from his own party, AKEL, the Communist Party, has traditionally been the party in Cyprus that most wants a solution. So I don't think one should read too much into the past. Let's look to the present and the future. What President-elect Papadopoulos said about negotiating on the basis of the UN plan was rather positive. I gather he intends to work extremely closely with President Clerides in the next 2 weeks. Let's see where we can get to.
Okay, Lord Hannay, many thanks. Some news just in. Diplomats at the European Union summit in Brussels say the meeting has just ended with an agreed statement urging Iraq to comply with the United Nations resolutions and warning that arms inspections can't continue indefinitely without full cooperation from Baghdad. But the statement said that war was not inevitable and that force should only be used as a last resort. Let's go live now to Brussels and to our correspondent Guito Hari. Guito, they came to put together some sort of, an accord. An accord is what they've got, but It's nothing much of an accord, is it?
It's one that essentially gives something to both sides, but in essence actually papers over the cracks, fudges the issues, avoids the main issue. Of course, most people feel that if force is used, it should be as a last resort. Of course, all sides agree that Saddam Hussein should be disarmed and the world would be a safer and better place if he was. But the question facing the world community at the moment is, when do you pull the plug on the process that is ongoing at the moment, weapons inspections in Iraq? When do you decide that that is actually never going to produce the results that you want, never going to lead to the disarmament of Saddam Hussein? Now, essentially, Tony Blair came here to Brussels as the British Prime Minister, feeling that the time has practically come to pull the plug. He can wait a week or two, wait till the next report by the chief UN's weapons inspector. Yes, France has come here saying they're inclined to feel that weapons inspections could actually deliver results, and you shouldn't pull the plug on them in a week, in 2 weeks, in 3 weeks, maybe not even for many months. That essential issue of timing has just been passed on to the UN Security Council. They haven't come even remotely close to resolving it.
And as far as the relationships within Europe is concerned, they were supposed to achieve some sort of consensus of opinion, but it appears that the divisions are deeper than ever tonight.
They are, because what you've had is not only the common positions, which we knew this morning were pretty irreconcilable, France thinking that the weapons inspections could work, Tony Blair thinking it's already clear they're not going to work. But what we also have now is a sort of a bit of passion and venom. We're very rarely told what goes on behind closed doors at these meetings. But this evening we have been told that President Chirac of France actually got up and said, we're talking about life and death issues here. We're talking about the potential deaths of tens of thousands of Iraqi men and women, and we've all got to wake up to that. And then we're told that Silvio Berlusconi, the Italian Prime Minister, stood up, shot him down essentially, and said, don't you go talking to me about lives and deaths of innocent civilians. How about September the 11th in New York? How about the people who could die from weapons of mass destructions? How about the people who could die if terrorists actually get hold of the kind of weapons that people like Saddam Hussein is trying to develop? A big emotional punch-up behind closed doors, so the communique tonight, bland in its words, will barely paper over those quite deep and emotional divisions that exist.
Okay, Guito, we'll leave it there for the moment. Many thanks, Guito Howdy in Brussels. We're told that the French President Jacques Chirac may give a media briefing, and the EU presidency may well also speak to the media. We'll bring that to you live as and when it happens. In fact, it has begun. Let's go across to Brussels now and listen to what the Greek spokesman is having to say.
Κάτι τέτοιο. Περίμεναν από μας μια επικοδομητική συνεισφορά που θα οδηγούσε σε μια ενιαία στάση. Αυτό φαινόταν ιδιαίτερα δύσκολο και τι είχαμε επιτύχει με τα συμπεράσματα του Συμβουλίου των Υπουργών της 27ης Ιανουαρίου και τη δημόσια ανακοίνωση της 4ης Φεβρουαρίου να κανονίσουμε ένα πλαίσιο. Σήμερα πετύχαμε.
Well, for those of you who don't speak Greek, as neither do I, that was the Greek representative there speaking. Of course, Greece holding the EU presidency at the moment. We're waiting for the British Prime Minister to give his reaction to the result of this of the emergency EU summit. Let's go live now to Tony Blair and hear what he's having to say.
Organised the special council this evening, which I think was very useful for us to discuss the situation concerning Iraq. And although obviously I think people know well the positions of different countries, I think it's worth emphasising the points that we all had in common. The first is that every country recognises the threat posed by Saddam and weapons of mass destruction, and the link between those weapons and the possibility of their getting into the hands of terrorists. Secondly, there was obviously full support, reiterated support, for the United Nations Resolution 1441 and every aspect of it. Thirdly, it was very clear that there was again total support for the principle underpinning that resolution, which is that the cooperation by Iraq has to be full and unconditional. And there was an acceptance, I think, again, by everyone around the table that there was not that full cooperation as yet. And fourthly, there was a very clear view, again, as has been expressed most recently in the European Union communique of the 27th of January, that this is the final opportunity for Iraq to disarm peacefully. And as Kofi Annan told us earlier, if Iraq continues to defy, the Security Council will have to face its responsibilities. I think the other thing that is important is that I hope very much that those points of agreement, whatever the differences, those points of agreement send a strong message and signal to Iraq. This really is the final opportunity to disarm peacefully. People want this conflict resolved peacefully, but it can only be done on the basis of the full and total compliance with the United Nations, and that means cooperating with the UN inspectors, not in part, but in full, not simply on process, but on substance. And I think there is nothing more important for us in Europe at the moment than to send that strong, unequivocal signal. Iraq will be disarmed of weapons of mass destruction. Whether it is done peacefully or by conflict, by military action, is up to Saddam and the Iraqi regime. That's all I need to say by way of openness. Right, Adam.
How long is this final offer on offer for? I mean, what is the duration of this indefinite period? And do you personally agree with Prime Minister Berlusconi, who apparently said that Saddam Hussein would never disarm because he needs his weapons to keep his people down?
Well, I've always been sceptical about Saddam disarming for the simple reason that we've been round this track for 12 years. And there's no doubt at all of the complete misery that Iraqi people
Well, that's the British Prime Minister Tony Blair there giving his reaction to that statement issued at the end of the European Union summit in Brussels. Let's go back live now to the Greek presidency. I do believe that they're speaking in English now, so we can understand what they're saying.
But should only be used as a last resort in order to settle a conflict. And we await from what we expect of the Iraqi regime is to bring an end to this crisis by complying with the resolutions of the Security Council. The position of the EU on Iraq is that it must be full and effective disarmament in accordance with Resolution 1441 of the UN Security Council and all the other resolutions taken by the UN Security Council. We want to achieve this peacefully. This is what the European people want. We believe that the focus of the international order is the UN. It is the UN which has the priority, the primary responsibility for managing the Iraqi crisis, and the issue of the disarmament of Iraq is in the hands of the Security Council. We give our full support to the Security Council in achieving in fulfilling its obligations. We fully support the UN inspectors. They have to be given the time and the resources as decided by the Security Council to carry out their task. But the controls cannot continue indefinitely in the absence of full Iraqi cooperation. This means that all the issues which have been raised in the inspectors' reports have to be met and a response has to be given to them. Iraq must have no illusions It cannot draw out this issue indefinitely. It must disarm and it must cooperate immediately and fully. The Iraqi regime will be alone responsible for the consequences if it continues to flout the will of the international community and does not take the necessary measures and does not take this last chance offered to it. We recognize the unity and determination of the international community as expressed in Resolution 1441 of the UN Security Council. The resolution also refers to the efforts made in the context of contacts with the Arab countries and the League of Arab Nations. It also refers to the Palestinian crisis. And finally, it stresses the need for unity in the international community because we are committed to working with all our partners, especially the United States, for the disarmament of Iraq, for peace and stability in the region, and for a future which meets the expectations of all its people. I believe that today's decision is a decision which shows our desire, our determination to make progress and to put flesh on the bones of the external policy of the EU. This is a policy which still requires a great deal of work. It requires much effort. But today's example shows that we can do this work. Thank you.
Thank you. I really congratulate Kostas Simitis and the Greek presidency because this was the right decision at the right time, and it's a demonstration that the Europeans want a European response. As a matter of fact, we didn't forget, and we cannot forget, the millions in the streets this weekend. And so we came together to send a message to the world. Europe is united, and its distinctive voice must be heard. And we uphold the authority of the United Nations and the resolution of the international community. We reaffirm our solidarity with the United States in the face of this international crisis, and we say no to the retention and proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. To Saddam Hussein we say, comply fully UN resolution or face the consequence. To our Muslim and Arab countries we say, terrorism is our common enemy. Let us work together for a future in which our children know only peace and cooperation. There is no clash of civilization. This is our message. But the Iraqi crisis cannot be seen in isolation. The Middle East is unstable and dangerous. It is our neighborhood, and we cannot ignore the daily cycle of violence and terror. There has been agreement on the objective, Israel and Palestine, two states living side by side in peace. The international community must pull together on the means of getting there. That is why we urge implementation of a clear road map. I repeat, we urge the implementation of a clear road map. We cannot allow international crises multiply. They infect the world community and they foster terrorism and intolerance. Europe has suffered too much from such evils. on its own past. It is time for action. Let us disarm Iraq and settle the Middle East conflict once for all. Then we can sit down with our friends and neighbors to build a better world.
Thank you, Romano.
Not really. I mean, I think everything has been said and well said. I think that which is important to underline today is that the European Union has a position about a very important potential conflict in the world, that the young and not so young Europe is together, and that we have found a common position that it will be not only implemented by us, but also to try to convince others that this is a good way to try to solve this dramatic situation in which we are. The President has said very clearly what are the parameters of this situation. Iraq has to disarm. The center of gravity of the process should be in the United Nations, and we want to support the role that had been done by the inspectors. But we know that the time is not endless, but we are going to give all the help that is needed or that is required by the United Nations to help the inspectors. They are, at the end of the day, our ears and our eyes, and therefore we have to support them. And that, I think, is a good contribution that the European Union can do to peace and to the stability in the world.
Προχωρήσουμε στις ερωτήσεις. Λοιπόν.
Questions. Okay, let's start.
Well, there you go. A final press briefing given there by Kostas Samitas. First of all, you heard the Greek Prime Minister. You then heard Romano Prodi, the President of the European Commission, and Javier Solana, the European Union's Foreign Policy Chief. Kostas Samitas said it was the position of the EU that it required full and effective disarmament from Iraq in accordance with Resolution 1441. We intend to achieve this, he said, peacefully, which is what the European people want. The focus of the international order, he said, is the UN, which has sole responsibility for managing the crisis. In just a few moments here on BBC World, a weather forecast, and then it's the World Business Report. But that's all from the newsroom for now. Bye-bye.
World Business Report, next on BBC World.
America's Cup sailing, like global finance, demands dedication, teamwork, and expertise. Only a skilled crew committed to excellence can create the winning force we call the power of partnership. UBS Financial Services Group. Congratulate the Alinghi crew on their outstanding achievement in qualifying for the America's Cup final. UBS, the power of partnership.
Market Board, sponsored by Credit Suisse, follow World Business Report on BBC World. You're watching BBC World. We bring you up to date with the latest financial news now in World Business Report.
European finance ministers gather to look at how any war with Iraq would affect their already shaky economies.
The markets are closed for President's Day in New York, but thank goodness they are, as the city is now in the grip of the worst snowstorm in 8 years. Hello, and a very warm welcome, and warm is the operative word for me, at least, to the World Business Report. In a very chilly New York City, I'm John Terrett.
And from a rather warmer London, I'm Sarah Coburn. Hello to you. Now, European ministers appear to be healing a rift, in opinion anyway, over the issue of war. But there is a clear and united front on their opinion on one matter: the impact of a conflict on Europe's fragile economies. Finance ministers gathering in Brussels this Monday have been assessing the likely impact of a war. There's been a lot of news to chew over. First of all, the European Commission says it will cut its autumn growth forecast for the region this year. And Europe's biggest economy could be edging closer to recession. Germany's economy shrank in the fourth quarter. Meanwhile, the president of the European Central Bank, Wim Duisenberg, warned that the threat of war is rattling business confidence and making the economic outlook highly uncertain. With troubled times ahead, Duisenberg said he'd be willing to stay on in his post beyond his July the 9th retirement date. Well, joining me now is Jacques Caillou, who is a European economist at Barclays Capital. Hello to you, Jacques. Let's just talk a little bit about the message that you took away from Mr. Duisenberg today.
Yeah, I think, first one has to remember that these speeches and the testimony in particular is more or less every time backward-looking, because it's merely summarizing the events that have occurred since the last speech, which was just prior to the 50 basis point cut by the ECB last time in December. So in that perspective, it is very much backward-looking. However, I think that the information that we get from the testimony is very much in line with the information we got from his last press conference, which is a position from the ECB which is ready to act.
And when you say ready to act, do you actually expect them to move to ease interest rates imminently?
Yes, I think that despite the fact that there is little information from today's speech about the fact that the ECB might be cutting as soon as the March meeting, we very much expect that to occur. And I think this will be reflected by the data that we will be getting by then. And this is why we expect the ECB to cut by 50 basis points in March or in April at the latest. So very much.
Jacques, it's John Terrett in Times Square. Here in the United States, there is a head of steam building up, a kind of anti-German and French sentiment caused by the steps that they're putting in the way of stopping the war with Iraq going ahead, and also because the economies are tanking, particularly in the case of Germany. Is there a model which would suggest what impact there may be if Americans stop spending on European, particularly French and German goods?
Well, I think there has been a number of stories around saying that Americans are starting boycotting a number of goods, especially from Germany and France. I think these are only small evidences, and we haven't seen any impact as yet in real economic data, and I think this will remain the case in the near future. I think there is an overall fear about long-term impacts and economic relationships between the two blocs. And this will very much depend on the politics going on between the EU and the US. And I think we're far from having the ultimate outcome yet.
It seems that on this Monday, we've been hearing all the elements really reflecting the same thing, really concerns about the European growth prospects. But of course, the one uncertainty in all of this is the question of war and the timing of war particularly.
Yes, I think this is weighing heavily on confidence. We are seeing a crisis of confidence in Europe, especially at the consumer level. And I think the uncertainty which is weighing on the consumer is huge. You have it from the rising unemployment, you have it from falling stock markets, and you have it, of course, about the fact that the consumer is against war in Iraq, especially in Europe, and that is weighing negatively on confidence. This is an aspect that the ECB is looking at, and we've seen in today's speech that they are very much concerned about the lack of confidence in the Eurozone and the prospect of war.
Jacques Caillou, thank you very much indeed for talking to us.
Thank you.
Well, the markets in New York may well be closed for President's Day, but there is a wealth of economic information which is due out later this week, and it has market-moving capabilities. Here is just some of it. Now, beginning on Wednesday, we will learn if the U.S. housing market was still the only major sector of growth in the U.S. economy during January, with housing starts. Now, that's the number of new homes that are being begun at this time. On Thursday, we have initial jobless claims, which is the usual weekly number of how many people joined the unemployment lines last week prior to last Saturday. If the number is below 400,000, then the markets will be relieved at that. Also on Thursday, the U.S. trade gap will be revealed. That's with the rest of the world and broken down region by region. We also get leading indicators, which is, as its name suggests, a pull together of all the leading indicators into just one survey. And there's also plenty of inflation news to get our teeth into towards the end of the week. Producer price inflation on Thursday and consumer price inflation on Friday. And the question many are asking, will we see any signs of deflation, the dreaded D word, in the U.S. economy? All in all, it's a statistician's dream week, I think.
Absolutely. Now, some of the other main business stories around. Spain's economy minister has called for the 15 European Union nations to coordinate a response to any surge in oil prices. Rodrigo Rato said a coordinated effort to deal with a surge in oil prices was important. Oil prices have eased this week, but have been riding two-year highs amid the uncertainties of a possible war in Iraq.
Venezuela's oil output could reach 2.8 million barrels a day, according to the president of the country's state-run oil company. That is, once restrictions on sending tankers to the country are lifted. Some major companies, including ExxonMobil, have decided to return to Venezuela despite a continuing work stoppage in the oil industry. Before the strike, oil output from Venezuela ran as high as 3.2 million barrels a day.
Nigerian oil workers went on strike this Monday, but government and oil company bosses insisted it posed no threat to production and exports. Nigeria is OPEC's fifth largest oil exporter. The strike had added to the fears of an industry already beset by political crises in Venezuela and the Middle East. Now, France's biggest privately run airline company, Air Libre, is being shut down for good with the loss of thousands of jobs. A court this evening ordered the liquidation of the company, and ironically it comes on the same day that Air France pilots are on strike in protest at plans to privatise the company. Christopher Bockman reports from France.
Air Libre's fleet was grounded 10 days ago. Its 3,200 employees are now likely to be laid off very quickly. The French government has tried to persuade Air France to hire as many of them as possible. But so far it seems as if few will be taken on. It's particularly hard for Air Libre pilots. They're used to flying McDonnell Douglas planes, and it's considered too costly to retrain them to fly Airbuses. Air Libre management has been insisting until the last moment that there are other potential investors out there prepared to take over the company. But none has come forward publicly since the Dutch privately owned business Imca pulled out of talks to buy the company 2 weeks ago. While many low-cost airline companies, including EasyJet and French charter business Aeris, are eager to take over Air Libre's 44,000 slots at Orly Airport, a major hub just outside Paris, none want to touch the company itself. Some of the routes between Paris and provincial French cities are profitable, and that's what airline companies are interested in running. Over the last decade, both British Airways and Swissair both tried to turn around Air Libre, but failed, and were forced to sell it on. The French government is also the big loser. Air Libre's collapse has made it harder to convince Air France employees to accept the company's privatization plans. The state is also owed around $120 million by Air Libre. But last week, the company announced it had run out of money and couldn't pay any more of its bills. Chris Botman, BBC News, France.
Well, as I've said several times, the markets are closed Monday in New York City. Got to tell you about the snow. It's been the worst storm here since 1996. It's cost around $1 million an inch, they reckon, to clean up. That's the New York City Mayor Bloomberg's estimate anyway. So it goes without saying, I think, that this is being called the blizzard of 2003. It's a good thing it was a public holiday on Monday, with New York coming to a halt under almost 2 feet of snow. New York City was officially declared a disaster area. There are 2,700 workers, maybe more, out there clearing up piles of snow like this right around the clock. Theatres are closed, including Phantom of the Opera, and almost no flights have gone in or out of New York for almost 24 hours.
It looks absolutely amazing, and considering that we here usually struggle when there's just a couple of inches of snow. Now, let me just bring you up to date with the European markets, which were working perfectly normally on this Monday, and in fact were very much inspired by a late rally on Wall Street on Friday. You can see that the FTSE in London was up by about 2% on the day, very much helped by a rise in drug stocks and also in banking stocks. The CAC 40 in Paris also up by about 2%, helped there by Alcatel. And if you look at the DAX in Frankfurt, up by about 1.3%, and Infineon there, the chip maker being the computer chip maker, I should say, being the star performer. Now, if you'd like to get in touch with us, do please send us your emails to biznews@bbc.co.uk.
Yes, no matter what, we read those emails and we put them on air if we possibly can. Business Matters on the BBC. Stay with us in the hours ahead.
If you need me, call me. No matter where you are, no matter how far.
Mr. Hogan is here to talk about software.
Yeah.
Beautiful day, isn't it? So, how much software would you like to buy?
We're thinking about a license for 20 servers.
Great! 500 it is.
We're not that big of a company.
Great! 500 it is.
Mr. Williams for 230 is here.
Great!
Thank you.
Does your software company actually listen? We do. Introducing Flex Select Licensing from Computer Associates.
Check out the latest destinations and enjoy the views before you leave home. Find out the most up-to-the-minute travel news before you become part of it. Wherever you're heading, Fast Track will make your journey easier. Fast Track at these times on BBC World.
Welcome back to World Business Report with me, Sarah Coburn in London, and John Terrett in New York. Now, German prosecutors have charged Deutsche Bank's chief executive, Josef Ackermann, and 5 others in connection with huge payments awarded to managers of the telecoms giant Mannesmann when it was bought by Vodafone in 2000. Ackermann, Klaus Wickel, head of Germany's influential IG Metall trade union, and the former Mannesmann chief executive Klaus Esser were among 6 people charged by the Düsseldorf state prosecutor on Monday. It follows a 2-year investigation.
It's the big names in the biggest corporate deal of the 1990s that are being charged in connection with enormous payouts to Mannesmann managers. Josef Ackermann, chief executive of Germany's largest financial services company Deutsche Bank, former Mannesmann chief executive Klaus Esser, and the head of the country's second biggest union Klaus Wickel are all facing the law after an investigation into severance payments and bonuses worth more than $107 million. A further 3 directors are also accused, but prosecutors won't release their names until they've been served with the charges. Mr. Ackermann and Mr. Wickel, both members of the Mannesmann Supervisory Board at the time of Vodafone's hostile takeover, are denying that they are guilty. Mr. Esser received a $32 million handshake as part of the deal, which started the investigation into substantial payoffs to help ease the takeover, which caused an outcry from German politicians and thousands of Mannesmann staff. The 2-year probe studied why Mr. Esser gave in to Vodafone's offer when he'd been so bitterly opposed to it. On Monday, he said the charges against him were arbitrary, as has Deutsche Bank said of the charges against Mr. Ackermann. However, it could be some time before the men appear in court, if at all. Prosecutors say it'll take months for a decision on whether a judge should hear the case. Dominic Di Natale, BBC News, Frankfurt.
Now then, Otis, a $6.8 billion division of the US conglomerate United Technologies, is famous around the world for making elevators, escalators and moving walkways. Well, the firm's just held a conference call with investors, formally unveiling a new escalator which it claims has enhanced safety features. I joined the president of the company, Ari Bousbey, alongside the escalators at one of this city's most famous landmarks, Grand Central Station. It was Otis that first introduced the world to the idea of a moving staircase at the Paris exhibition of 1900. Since then, the longest is said to be at Ocean Park, Hong Kong, the highest at a Moscow train station. And of course, there are escalators in virtually every department store throughout the world.
To an uninformed observer, aesthetics play a role. In fact, escalators in commercial retail are an important piece of the overall merchandising. We do participate with large supermarket, department stores in the interior architecture of their stores. The positioning of the escalators is important because it determines the flow of visitors and customers to that department store.
Otis and its rivals in Europe and Japan are concerned most of all about safety, which has prompted the latest product called Next Step Escalator.
The key innovations in safety have to do with reducing the risk of injury for passengers. Anytime you have people using a moving piece of equipment, you've got a risk. And it is those sets of risks that we have addressed with the Next Step Escalator. We have essentially eliminated entirely the risk created by the gap between the moving steps and the stationary panel on the side.
Otis employs 60,000 people in more than 200 countries around the world and operates in the volatile construction sector. Operating on this scale, how does a company such as this plan for growth?
We operate globally. And so parts of the world are not as affected by the crisis. I'm thinking of China especially. China is our fastest growing market. We see that economy continue to grow in the foreseeable future. And this year, we have been able to actually increase our new equipment orders by 11% year over year. That's because China grew so much that it more than offsets the declines in other parts of the world.
It's 150 years since Elisha Graves Otis demonstrated to a shocked audience in New York the world's first safe lift platform. There will be a celebration in the city to mark the occasion at the end of March.
Now you're watching World Business Report, and still to come on the programme. In China, it's the annual Spring Festival for millions of migrant workers in the cities, including 007's suit makers. That's after the break.
America's Cup sailing, like global finance, demands dedication, teamwork, and expertise. Only a skilled crew committed to excellence can create the winning force we call the power of partnership. UBS Financial Services Group.
Which company produces more oil than any other, but is still concerned about what a few drops could do to the environment? Which company manages today's largest petroleum reserves, but continues to seek out resources for the world of tomorrow? Which company produces its oil and gas in a single country, but supplies energy to the four corners of the globe? Which company? Saudi Aramco. Energy to the world.
We congratulate the Alinghi crew on their outstanding achievement in qualifying for the America's Cup final. UBS, the power of partnership.
Welcome back to World Business Report. John Terrett is in chilly New York, and I'm in London. Now, in China, the Spring Festival is almost over. This is the most important holiday of the year when millions of migrant workers in the city make their annual pilgrimage back home to the countryside. Now, for many of those in manufacturing, the rest of the year is spent not just working in a factory, but also living there. Nick Mackey reports from China's east coast city of Wenzhou on how one company, James Bond's suit maker, is treating its girls.
7 a.m. and it's action stations for Wenzhou's Bond girls. 1/3 of the workforce here at Xiamen, suit maker to 007, are migrants from China's poor rural heartland. The company provides them with free dormitory accommodation and subsidized meals. 22-year-old Zhu Zhen took the 20-hour train ride from Anhui province 2 years ago to secure this $170 a month job. Although she misses her family, she has no plans to move back home.
I've been working here for some years now, but at the Chinese New Year, I still want to go home. I miss my home very much. But I want to stay working here for some time.
Around 100 million migrants have marched to the cities since China began its economic reforms 20 years ago. This urbanization has lifted an additional 50 million people out of poverty, as many workers send cash to their families in the countryside. But with hundreds of millions of additional rural workers expected in the cities by 2010, there's a danger of uncontrolled growth of shanty towns. Well-established companies like Xiamen can afford adequate accommodation for these people, but many others, notably construction firms, leave the onus on their workers to find shelter. For the authorities, this is a key concern.
Small companies and companies not doing well have this problem, so we do need to pay attention to this. Some companies we stop, some companies we restrict.
Wenzhou, a powerful manufacturing hub, needs to maintain a steady flow of migrants to power its factories. That's why the city is now providing smaller companies with subsidized accommodation for the workers. China is undergoing one of the biggest population shifts in history. Migrant workers like Zhu Zhen are providing the inexpensive labor that's fueling the growth of the country's manufacturing industries. And with around 300 million people expected to move from the countryside to the cities over the next decade, China looks set to retain its competitive edge for many years to come. Nick Mackey, BBC News, Wenzhou.
Now, start of a new series, because all this week we're going to be taking a special look at the business of advertising. We begin by looking at some trends in the industry. With more and more ways to reach consumers, advertisers are finding it harder to pinpoint a captive audience. As a result, ads have started creeping into new and somewhat unexpected locations. For example, the elevator, public toilets, and now the New York taxi cab. Kate Noble has the story.
Taking a taxi ride in New York City may soon become a different experience. In this cab, an ad for a vehicle plays on an interactive screen that allows riders to search for information on New York restaurants, theaters, and clubs. Or you might have an entertainment news program running on a regular TV screen with ads for things to do in the city. Either way, it's a new road for advertisers to take in reaching consumers where they can't get away.
What we've done is make it to where it's intrusive, but it's not obnoxious. And what advertisers like is the fact that they can't change the channel, they can't turn it off, they definitely can't get up and go to the bathroom when they're in the taxi cab. One thing they've mentioned to me that they like is the captivity.
This has a seatbelt announcement as it begins. I can turn the volume up and down and mute it, but I can't change the channel or turn it off. This is the sort of thing that might be the future of taxi rides, watching TV while you go. But the thing that makes it especially suitable for New York is that in this city, most people take taxis by themselves, so it gives them something to do during the ride.
200 of New York's 12,000 taxis have been outfitted with screens, and there are plans for more. Each cab driver receives around $100 a month for agreeing to the TV, And so far, the reception from drivers has been positive.
It's gonna be all right. Keeps the passenger, calm a little bit. And it's good also for cab driver when we got a rest, so we go into the airport. We spend more than 2 hours, so we can watch TV also.
Tourists and New Yorkers alike may prefer to gaze out the window, but advertisers know that the screen will still be there, flashing their message. These days, there are few places to find an audience that can't escape. So now, perhaps traffic jams will be seen instead as marketing opportunities. Kate Noble, BBC News.
Great stuff. And Kate will be back all this week with more on advertising. Did you notice how lovely the city was looking, how lovely and sunny in that last shot? Take a look at it right now. That is the scene outside my studio here in Times Square, New York. We've had what they're calling the blizzard of 2003. Businesses are closed and people are struggling to get home. Most of those people will be tourists. Mayor Bloomberg reckons it's costing $1 million per inch of snow. We've had around 19 so far.
It looks very, very beautiful, John, but I have to say you're a far hardier bunch than we would be if it happened to us. But that is it from us for now. Thank you for watching.
And it's 2 for the price of 1 here, because you've got Sarah in London and I'm John Terrace in Times Square. Thanks for watching.
Chanel is one of the most famous names in the world.
Very rich women buy Chanel.
But no longer one of the most fashionable.
They need to get the granddaughters in to make their brand survive.
So now as the it girls shop elsewhere, the brand is fighting back.
I see it in my sleep, wake up and put it on a piece of paper.
Inside Chanel, at these times on BBC World.
This is BBC World with a summary of the world's financial markets.
Market Wars, sponsored by Credit Suisse Group. Market Wars, sponsored by Credit Suisse Group.
24 hours a day, 7 days a week. BBC News is next.
Earth Report in 30 minutes on BBC World.
EU leaders end their summit calling on Iraq to comply with UN resolutions. The final statement said force should only be used as a last resort. The Iraqis say U-2 spy planes have started overflying their territory. And at least 21 people are dead after a stampede at a nightclub in Chicago. Hello, this is BBC World News. I'm Adrian Finnegan. EU leaders have managed to find enough common ground on Iraq to issue a joint statement. They ended their emergency summit in Brussels, urging Iraq to comply with UN resolutions. In a final statement, they warned Baghdad that arms inspections could not continue indefinitely. The statement also includes an assertion that war is not inevitable and that force should only be used as a last resort. Britain's Prime Minister Tony Blair said it sent a strong signal to Baghdad that this was Iraq's final opportunity to disarm peacefully. However, President Chirac of France said there was no need for a second UN resolution on Iraq as long as weapons inspections continued.
Well, at least his arrival went smoothly. Tony Blair looked drained after a weekend of anti-war demonstrations, but this Brussels summit was hardly a rest cure. The EU has been deeply split over Iraq. I asked the Prime Minister how the differences could be resolved.
First of all, I think it's important that we look at the points of unity. Everyone agrees Saddam is a threat. Everyone agrees that he must be disarmed, otherwise he poses a real danger to his region and the world. And I think and believe most people understand that if that cannot be done peacefully, it has to be done by force. And I think the most important thing at the moment is to send a signal of strength, not weakness.
But in an extraordinary diplomatic maneuver, French President Jacques Chirac signaled something else entirely, his determination to resist the march to war. There is no need for a second UN resolution today, which France would have no choice but to oppose. Outside the summit, an air raid siren. This anti-war protest wasn't exactly Hyde Park size, but it made a point. European public opinion is against the war. A guest at the summit, UN Secretary-General Kofi Annan, with a message perhaps tailored for the divided EU.
I hope that member states will come together and argue their case out in a patient, persuasive diplomacy that is required to produce common front.
Our guys are going to put together a...
But the EU is a diplomatic battleground, with Messrs Blair and Chirac fighting to win the European argument. No doubt about it, British officials were intensely irritated by what they see as Jacques Chirac's anti-war posturing. But they claim the centre of gravity inside the EU is now clearly moving Tony Blair's way. Minutes ago, the British team emerged relatively happy with the summit conclusion's key points. Inspections must not go on indefinitely. War is the final resort.
What was interesting about tonight's meeting is that in reality, not a single person around the table disputed the fact that at present, Iraq is not fully cooperating as it should have.
So where does another EU summit leave us? With Britain and France at loggerheads, with Europe split, and still a looming showdown at the United Nations. Stephen Sacker, BBC News, Brussels.
And we'll be crossing live to Brussels later in this programme. In the meantime, the Iraqi Foreign Ministry says a U-2 spy plane has flown over its territory as part of the UN disarmament inspections. The overflight reportedly happened in the early afternoon Iraqi time. Iraq has another 2 weeks to show a change of attitude and to comply fully with UN Resolution 1441.
After the weekend's demonstrations, the Iraqi authorities organized their own anti-war protests right on the doorstep of the UN inspectors. But the UN teams are persisting with their operations. Yesterday, they visited the Al-Taji complex, where the remains of Al-Samud missiles were left lying abandoned. Last week, the UN found that a version of this rocket exceeded its permitted range. It's the kind of discrepancy that in the future, the United States will pounce on and use as a reason to abandon the inspections process. But the Iraqi leadership knows it has a few more cards up its sleeve with which it will try to convince the world that the weapons inspections are working. In the next week, they will allow the UN to begin surveillance flights with U-2 spy planes. They'll be followed by aircraft donated by Russia and France. All of this would add momentum to those who want more time for the inspectors. The Iraqi authorities know full well that the recent reports by the UN weapons inspectors gave them some additional breathing space. It didn't let them off the hook, because Britain and the United States are still continuing to apply military pressure. Despite the demonstrations and orchestrated shows of defiance, Iraq knows that the threat of war has not been lifted. Much now depends on what concessions this country makes in the coming few weeks. Raghi Omar, BBC News, Baghdad.
At least 21 people have been killed in a stampede at a nightclub in Chicago on the President's Day holiday in the United States. They were crushed to death after security staff used pepper spray to break up a fight. That caused a panic which sent clubbers rushing for the exits. Witnesses say that 2 out of 3 of the exits were blocked or locked. Nick Bryant reports.
Chaos on the streets of Chicago's South Side, one of America's most violent neighborhoods, now the scene of its worst nightclub tragedy in recent memory. The Epitome Club was packed with more than 1,500 people when a fight broke out on the dance floor between 3 young women. Pepper spray was used to break up the scuffle, sparking a deadly stampede to the door. As clubgoers rushed down this staircase, at least 20 people were killed in the crush.
There were so many people and we were standing so close together. I was being crushed by people. I didn't even fall. I was pushed down the stairs, then everybody started piling down on my leg, and I couldn't move my legs at all.
At least 50 people were ferried off to hospital, many suffering from serious breathing difficulties. But more would likely have escaped with their lives had the club's emergency exit doors not been locked. A police investigation is now underway. Nick Bryant, BBC News, Washington.
The Israeli army has ambushed and killed a senior official of the Palestinian militant group Hamas in the Gaza Strip. An undercover army unit waited for Riyad Abu Zaid and his bodyguards as they drove along a coastal road.
The Israeli defense minister had vowed to strike hard at the militant group Hamas. This is what followed, an operation seemingly carried out by an undercover Israeli unit against Riyad Abu Zaid, a Hamas member. Privately, Israeli security sources describe Riyad Abu Zaid as the second in command of Hamas's armed wing. Hamas sources have said only that he was one of their fighters. After the ambush, Mr. Abu Zaid was flown by Israeli military helicopter to hospital in Israel, where he reportedly died of his wounds. This latest Israeli military activity comes after an Israeli tank was destroyed by a bomb in the northern Gaza Strip on Saturday. Hamas say they planted it. 4 Israeli soldiers were killed. Early on Monday, the Israelis demolished a house belonging to a Hamas member they say planned the attack. Palestinian security sources say that some 30 tanks were involved. 2 Palestinians were killed in exchanges of fire during the incursion. Massive crowds turned out for the funerals of 6 members of Hamas's military wing who died in an explosion on Sunday. The cause of the blast is still unclear, but mourners demanded revenge and promised further attacks on Israeli targets. James Rogers, BBC News, Gaza.
We'll return now to our top story this hour, the EU emergency summit in Brussels, where EU leaders managed to find enough common ground on Iraq to issue a joint statement. Let's go live now to Brussels and to our correspondent, Gito Hari. Gito, what are we to make of this, this final statement? I suppose we should be relieved that at least they managed to agree on something.
Well, the joy of the statement and the curse in the statement, of course, is that different sides can actually spin it their own way. The British delegation tonight trying to say, look at this, it says quite clearly that UN inspections in Iraq can't go on indefinitely, that force has got to be an option. The French can go around telling us all, look at this, it's saying we must try and find a peaceful resolution. Forces only got to be used as a very last resort. You can put a different emphasis on it. Essentially, they've all managed to sort of pass the buck back to the UN Security Council. Tony Blair saying tonight there are far more arguments to have over this one, and all sides realizing that the battle over whether or not there'll be a second UN resolution or not will be a very difficult one, and a crucial one, of course, all round.
To what extent then did the French, German and Belgian positions soften, if at all, to get this final agreement? And are the British disappointed, or is it no worse than they expected?
Well, the British wanted to come here and essentially get the various foreign ministers and later this evening the leaders to actually just endorse the process that they think everybody signed up to back in November. That was going down the UN route, backing UN Resolution 1441, that meaning if Iraq is in material breach, then action should follow. Action means military force used against them. Tony Blair displayed his frustration tonight because everyone around the dinner table, according to him, is agreed that Iraq is not offering the full, immediate, unconditional cooperation demanded of it, and yet some parties, he didn't name them, but we all know he meant France in particular, with a few others behind, don't follow that through to say it's a material breach. Tony Blair claims to be completely baffled by that, and deeply angry, of course, that now is threatening to throw this off course, and he wants to send a strong signal from here. I doubt if it's being read as a strong signal in Baghdad tonight.
The final statement says that warns Baghdad rather that arms inspections can't continue indefinitely. Just how long then is the EU prepared to give Baghdad before it backs the use of force?
Myself, various colleagues of mine, we've all asked that question of timing in various guises to different ministers. None of us seem to get anywhere. They keep saying it's not about timing, it's about attitude, but it clearly is about timing. Do you just allow another couple of weeks to see whether Hans Blix can find some sort of breakthrough in Iraq, whether he comes back and says, actually give me time and I'll sort this out? Or does he come back and say, I can't do my job? Can you establish that in another 2 weeks, in another 3 weeks, another 4 weeks? The million-dollar question here is whether or not France is just making one little gesture, playing to the gallery, hoping to sort of get brownie points with public opinion across the world as well as in France for having resisted what they see as a sort of rush to war by the US, or is France seriously contemplating at the moment tripping this whole process up fundamentally by vetoing a second UN resolution, which would cause enormous problems to Tony Blair, and holding out for an alternative which they might think would be to contain Saddam Hussein through some sort of sanctions regime and an ongoing weapons inspections process.
Okay, Guido, many thanks. Guido Hari in Brussels. Turkey's Prime Minister Abdullah Gül has said the UN Secretary-General Kofi Annan will unveil another peace plan in a last-ditch attempt to reunite the partitioned island of Cyprus. The newly elected president of the Greek Cypriot side, Tassos Papadopoulos, has held a meeting with the UN envoy on the island. Mr. Papadopoulos says he's ready to start talks, but wants changes to the current UN reunification plan. Well, Britain's special representative for Cyprus, Lord David Hannay, says the last year of intensive negotiations has laid a strong framework for agreement on reunification, which will be helped by Kofi Annan's visit next week.
Kofi Annan is going to come to the island. He's going first to Ankara and Athens, and then to the island next week. And probably at some stage in this process, he is going to revise his earlier proposals. Not fundamentally, but he is going to make changes which will no doubt reflect some of the points that have been being made to him by both sides.
Mr. Papadopoulos in particular says that he wants changes to the plan. I mean, is it possible to tweak it at this late stage without sparking further counter-demands from the Turkish side?
I'm sure that there can be changes, but at this very late stage, if you want to change, the other side are likely to want to change too, not necessarily on the same issues. Alvaro de Soto and Kofi Annan are very skilled negotiators. They've handled many negotiations. They know the techniques. They know where the flexibility is and where it isn't. There is a possibility for change, otherwise the UN wouldn't be even contemplating revising its proposals. But I think to suggest that you can tear the whole plan up and start from scratch, that would be complete nonsense. But nobody is asking for that. I notice that President-elect Papadopoulos is not saying that. He's saying he will negotiate within the framework of the UN proposals.
I know you said you didn't want to comment on someone's election, but Mr. Papadopoulos worked hard during the election campaign to fight off the view that he's a hardliner, that he's distrustful distrusted and disliked by the Turkish side. I mean, is that actually how he's viewed by the Turkish side? And will it be possible for him to build the kind of relationship with Rauf Denktash that his predecessor had?
Well, I think the view of him from the north, as you've heard from Mr. Denktash, is not a positive one. Whether that is justified or not, I wouldn't really like to comment on. The fact is that the main party that supported the Papadopoulos campaign, apart from his own party, AKEL, the Communist Party, has traditionally been the party in Cyprus that most wants a solution.
Lord David Hannay. We'll take a break now, but still to come on the programme, the bizarre tale of how David Beckham is injured by his own manager. More in a few moments. Hello again, this is BBC World. A reminder now of the main news. EU leaders warn Iraq that arms inspections can't continue indefinitely. They said that war was not inevitable and that force should only be used as a last resort. The Iraqis say that U-2 spy planes have begun overflying their territory. Saudi Arabia, one of Iraq's most powerful neighbors and one of America's key allies, has warned that a war could destabilize the entire Middle East. Prince Saud Al Faisal, the foreign minister, gave an exclusive interview to the BBC's John Simpson, in which he also signaled that a unilateral attack by the US on Iraq would be seen as an act of aggression.
Independent action in this, we don't believe are good for the United States interests in the region. It would encourage people to think, as you said, that what they are doing is a war of aggression rather than a war for the implementation of the United Nations resolution. So we are ardently hoping, we are urging the United States to continue to work through the United Nations and not to create an active of individually taking charge of the duties of the Security Council.
Which is aggression.
No, the Security Council
Which would be, no, I mean if the United States
is supposed to use force to implement United Nations resolutions. That's not aggression.
But if the United States did it on its own, it would
appear as aggression.
I can just imagine Donald Rumsfeld or George Bush, if he watches the BBC, and we know that quite a number of the members of the administration do watch it, watching this interview and saying, that's it, Saudi Arabia, they're on the wrong side, they're completely against us.
We have told them that we think war is going to be a tremendous threat to the region. We think that, especially if it doesn't come through the United Nations authority, that it would be a dangerous thing to do. The only difference that I'm saying here is what is the best policy to pursue towards Iraq. If change of regime comes with the destruction of Iraq, then you are solving one problem and creating 5 more problems. That is the consideration that we have to give, because we live in the region.
These last years, since the start of the first Gulf War, have been the years in which fundamentalism has really started to take serious ground in Saudi Arabia. You must be worrying that that process is going to continue even more after this.
Our worry is the new emerging fundamentalism in the West more than
in the United States. You
well,
almost
the
said
United States and the West. The fundamentalism in our region is on the wane. There it's in the ascendancy, and that is the threat.
Prince Saud Al Faisal, Saudi Arabia's foreign minister, speaking there to the BBC's World Affairs editor John Simpson. This is BBC World. Well, we start the international football news, sports news rather, with a bizarre tale from the world of football. The manager of Manchester United, Alex Ferguson, has described the injury to David Beckham's face as a freak act of nature. The footballer was hit above the eye by a boot kicked in anger by the manager after his team lost their match on Saturday.
A big car, a big name and a bit of bother. David Beckham arrives for training today carrying a new scar. It's only an inch or so long, but newspaper reports suggest this was caused by Beckham's own manager. Sir Alex Ferguson, so angry about his team's latest defeat, he kicked a boot across the United dressing room and it hit Beckham in the face. Sir Alex was saying nothing this morning, still fuming after Saturday's defeat.
He doesn't think losing is on the agenda, and unfortunately it is. And you've got to accept the defeat with grace, which he doesn't do. I've never ever heard him saying on the day we were beaten by the better side. He always blames the referee or the shape of the ball or his watch he stopped or something.
United have refused to comment, but at the club this morning supporters were rather surprised.
If it's true, yeah, he has gone too far. But...
Yeah, maybe he does take it a little bit too far sometimes, but it's just because of his attitude, and that's why he's so successful, in my opinion.
Good job he didn't hit Roy Keane. Wanted he'd have thrown it back at him.
These are tough times for United, badly beaten on Saturday and worried that Arsenal are now the dominant team in England. Seasoned observers of Sir Alex Ferguson say he won't take any of this lightly.
Ferguson has to assert the fact that he is boss. What he says is what matters, and nobody should stand in his way. And I think that there is a strong possibility now, if United don't pick up trophies this season, that some big names will be leaving Old Trafford this summer, possibly David Beckham, possibly Ryan Giggs.
As for Beckham, well, Saturday's a day he'll now want to forget. Booted in the ankle, apparently booted in the face, and certainly booted out of the FA Cup. And next up, it's Juventus at home. Adam Parsons, BBC News.
Well, Alex Ferguson's statement appears to be something of an apology as Manchester United attempt to draw a line under the incident. Earlier, Adam Parsons, whose report you've just seen, told us that in the end, practical footballing considerations will overcome any ill feeling between Beckham and his manager.
He can't afford to fall out with Sir Alex too much, of course. He is, after all, a salaried Manchester United employee. And Sir Alex Ferguson, of course, rules that club with his notorious fist of steel, rod of iron, depending on which road you want to go down. I think David Beckham and Alex Ferguson, as I say, have a slightly frayed relationship. Alex Ferguson doesn't really approve too much of the showbiz lifestyle, of the glamour, of the glitz that surrounds the Beckhams. However, I think he does recognise that Beckham is a very, very important player to him, and I think there is an element of contrition in Ferguson's statement.
Adam Parsons. Finally, some sad news from the world of baseball. Baltimore Orioles pitcher Steve Bechler has died after collapsing while on a training run. He was just 23. Bechler had just made the breakthrough into the major leagues after spending the early part of his career in the AAA farm system. He made his debut for Baltimore last September. And that's the sports news. Russia's parliament has begun a series of hearings about new laws to stop human trafficking. Every year, sex traffickers lure hundreds of young Russian women to Western Europe. The women are promised well-paid jobs, but they often end up as sex slaves.
For 6 years, Natasha has concealed a terrifying secret. All that time she's suffered in silence. Overcome with shame, she continues to hide the truth about what happened to her from all her friends and her family.
A woman came up to me at the train station. She offered me part-time work in Germany as a nanny. I said yes. When I got to Germany, though, she took away my passport. Then she drove me to a bar on the edge of town.
These undercover pictures show the kind of work that was waiting for Natasha. She was forced into prostitution in clubs and bars across Germany, like hundreds of thousands of other women lured from the east to the west each year by the promise of a good job.
This is part of the whole problem. Russian newspapers are full of ads offering young women the chance to make big money abroad, up to $2,000 a month working as nannies, dancers, or washing up in restaurants. Too good to be true? Well, it often is. And what may appear to be a golden opportunity can so easily turn into a nightmare.
Because there's so little public discussion here about trafficking, Russian women often have no idea of the dangers. Yana is a dancer who's looking for work abroad.
Why not? It's no more dangerous working abroad than working in Russia. Anyway, who dares wins.
But the risks are high. This United Nations video shows the dangers from job adverts which promise women the earth. The UN's helping Russia's parliament draft a law to fight trafficking, to help the global war on organized crime.
Organized crime is globalizing. It's like a commercial operation, and the profits that are generated by trafficking in human beings are used to fund other criminal operations, and there's always the possibility that some of the profits are being used to fund terrorist organizations.
Natasha survived her ordeal. She's still struggling, though, to rebuild her life.
The nightmares are gone, but I still can't tell anyone what happened to me. They won't understand. They'll say it was all my fault.
Steve Rosenberg, BBC News, Southern Russia.
And that's all from the BBC World Newsroom for the moment. Goodbye.
Hello again. The snow continues to fall in the extreme northeast of the US, but it is showing signs of easing off. We've had widespread disruption across many states, falling as rain largely across the south. That's now petered out, but still the snow falls through parts of New York State and especially up through New Jersey and Maine. 7 states in total declared a state of emergency at some point or other during Monday. Baltimore and Washington, airports closed here. They were some of the worst hit states, with 2 feet of snow reported in places. Now the snow is on its way out. Good news here, high pressure dominating by Tuesday, allowing the cleanup to take place. Still some snow flurries perhaps in the far northeast. That's tied in with the same weather system, but most of the snow from that I think across central Canada. But it's only going to be a brief respite because another area of low pressure develops, bringing more wet weather extending up from Texas up again through the mid-Atlantic states, with again a bit more snow likely on Wednesday. Out across more western parts of the US, well, much quieter, largely fine and dry. Some sleet and snow likely in the extreme northwest, so Seattle perhaps catching a little bit, and some snow showers in and around the Great Lakes, but by and large a little bit calmer. But there is that next area of wet weather working its way up, which we'll need to keep an eye on. Snow showers likely across central Canada. Temperatures in eastern areas on the up this week. Temperatures further west taking a bit of a dive. Temperatures certainly are taking a bit of a dive in Buenos Aires, with some wet weather arriving on Wednesday. Into Africa now, some showers perhaps disrupting play a little bit at the cricket in South Africa and Zimbabwe. Showers easing off from the Gulf of Guinea. Some wet weather at times along the north coast of Africa, part of the same weather system getting into Casablanca, which may bring some further rain to Iberia. Athens and Istanbul in particular look like staying very wet and rather chilly. Still very chilly across northern Europe, largely dry though and fine. Dry and fine across much of the Gulf as well, perhaps a little bit more cloud pushing southwards during Tuesday and Wednesday. A lot of cloud at the moment across Pakistan. It's brought some very heavy rain, pretty damp too in Delhi. These 2 lumps of cloud were some pretty ferocious storms. It's all only slowly continuing to drift a little bit further eastwards. Further east still in Beijing, fine, with temperatures well up above average, as indeed they are in Hong Kong, and temperatures on the